Good day. My name is Professor Dr. Bankole Johnson, and welcome again to Time Travel in Medicine. In fact, this episode is all about time, and this episode is entitled, Why Do We Have to Die? Now, over here, we have the example of the current doomsday clock, which was invented by Albert Einstein in 1945 and sits in the University of Chicago, and it is calculated at the current time that we have about 90 seconds to doomsday. However, we're not going to talk about at the apocalypse of the planet. We're going to talk about human life. That not all creatures on this planet seem to age and die. In fact, we believe that some creatures are more or less immortal. Examples of this include the backward-growing jellyfish, the tardigrade, also the sturdy turtle. And so there are a range of these animals, and in fact, now the number of them are up to about 16 if you do your scientific searches. In humans, aging seems to be controlled by a complex series of biochemical and biological events. The most important thing to realize is that we're all under a tremendous amount of genetic control. Now, while genetics is not destiny, it is certainly important in determining how we age. Now, let me discuss a concept that has been out there for a long time. One concept has been, for me, and I'll do this by showing you a chromosome. So I'm going to pick this up and I'm going to show you a chromosome. This is a chromosome, and in the chromosome, which I'd say it's very poorly drawn, there are these bits on the end called telomeres. And the telomeres at the end seem to dictate how rapidly we age or the aging process. The chromosomes contain DNA strands, and the telomeres sit on top of these DNA strands. As cells divide, and our cells divide about 50 to 7 times in their lifetime before they become senescent, and then they basically die. This is called the Haycliffe limit. So 50 to 70 divisions. So basically, if we can slow down those divisions, you will live longer. So what governs this? This is governed by 3 different processes at the very least. And I'm going to put this down. The first is called sirtuin, which is a gene that regulates a lot of fat and glucose metabolism. Now, sirtuin is important. Most of you have heard of SIR2 because SIR2 is found in yeast and is ubiquitous in yeast. But for humans and other animals, SIR1 to 6 and 7 seem to be more important. But we're not going to get into the bowels of what these genes do, except that they control a process called deacetylation. Now, there are some compounds that people take as vitamins like resveratrol that are meant to inhibit this process to produce a longer life. I'll say in humans, we do not have a lot of evidence that taking a lot of resveratrol actually is going to make you live longer. There are 2 other aspects called cis-D2, and the other one is insulin like IGF-1, which also contain metabolism. And the take-home message here is that metabolism is very, very important, especially mitochondrial action at a chemical process down to what's called the NAD to NADPH ratio that make it the symbol for us to understand how fast a person is aging and how that aging process is progressing. Okay, now you've heard a lot of chemistry, and now you're about to say, oh my goodness, I should have gone back to biochemistry or genetics 101. Let me summarize this for you. Our aging is controlled by a range of biochemical processes which are controlled by our genes. Our genes regulate the energy cell in an energy organelle in our body called the mitochondria, and this is also associated with fat, glucose metabolism, and the metabolism of other aspects of our biology. Importantly, though, it seems that, for example, some kind of dietary restriction in animals seems to make them live longer. Now, this has been tried in humans, but as far as I know, there is no evidence that dieting or starving makes you live longer. But it certainly happens in mice. And this is a very important aspect of what I'm trying to tell you today. We are not mice. And so we started to talk about telomeres and telomeres getting longer to make you live long, and they're shorter when you're living less or you're aging more rapidly. But guess what? Mice have very long telomeres relatively, and they don't live very long. So for us, it's a complex series of systems that make all the difference, let's say, in the world or to time or how you live. So what other aspects are important in terms of aging? There is a concept called oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is generated by the intake of oxygen. We produce something called the reactive oxygen species, and this actually has an effect to damage our cells. When our cells get damaged, they repair themselves, and if they can't be repaired, they die. If the genes get damaged inside of our cells, we have repair mechanisms. Some of them are controlled by sirtuin, which allow us to basically regenerate ourselves. But this has a point of time in which we basically stop repairing. Basically, the system gets thumbed out or gummed up, or however you want to actually describe it. And this research was actually found when studying cancer cells. In 1951, there was an African-American lady at Hopkins who had a tumor. She had a cervical tumor removed, and her name was Henrietta Lacks. And in fact, cancer cells taken from her have been used to develop these immortal cell lines. In fact, the reason why cancer is so dangerous is because it doesn't stop growing until it takes up all the space, damages organs, and kills the individual. So these HeLa cells are used for us to understand cancer and also to understand aging and biology. So what can we do to be able to help ourselves to be able to live a little longer? As I've said, metabolism is very important, and oxidative stress is very important, and inflammation is also very important. Now, there are certain ways in which we can reduce inflammation. Now, none of these are FDA approved, but some of these are ideas that are out there at the current time. For example, the use of hyperbaric oxygen may reduce inflammation in general and may absolutely help us to reduce oxidative stress. You may say, gosh, how is that possible? After all, the whole point of hyperbaric oxygen is to actually put in more oxygen. And so how does this happen to be able to reverse the aging process? There are 5 ways in which hyperbaric oxygen is meant to help with inhibiting the aging process. The first is it increases the length of the telomeres. These telomeres, the longer they get, seem to be protective about reducing or impairing the aging process. The second is that hyperbaric oxygen appears to increase stem cell proliferation. Stem cells are the cells that are important for us to grow new organs, repair, and also to have our tissues be in a healthy state. Another mechanism of hyperbaric oxygen is it creates antioxidant activity. The antioxidant activity helps as a scavenger of dead cells. In fact, in cells that are senescent or that are on the brink of going dormant and then dying. Additionally, hyperbaric oxygen seems to reduce inflammation and inflammatory factors. These inflammatory factors may not only be important for aging, but may also be important for cancer suppression. Finally, hyperbaric oxygen is important for creating angiogenesis, which is the, if you like, the increase of new blood vessels, and this actually helps with oxygenation of different cells and actually is associated with vitality. So hyperbaric oxygen seems to be a very important method that is continuing to be studied as we go further in time to be able to impair the aging process, or basically hold back time. One of the things I want to talk to you about in terms of the use of hyperbaric oxygen is what's called the oxygen paradox. When we breathe in oxygen, we create reactive oxygen species, and these damage our cells. So why would giving more oxygen seem to be better for us? Well, it seems to be that it is not just the amount of oxygen, but if you have a high amount of oxygen in the hyperbaric chamber and a lower amount of oxygen when you come out, it creates a gradient. The higher the oxygen, the greater the gradient. And this helps our bodies to be able to withstand a very complex process called oxidative stress, which has a cascade of reactions which actually impairs our health and actually accelerates aging. This is a very important aspect, we think, of how hyperbaric oxygen works. The other things you can do is to reduce your inflammatory component of your diet or the inflammatory components of what you do. So some of these you can look up in the series or the link that is after this to see what types of anti-inflammatory foods are there that you may want to take. Now, I will say none of this has been proven for a fact to be able to make you live longer, but I bet you they certainly help. Another component would be to take certain types of vitamins that may be able to help with your metabolism and be able to reduce these inflammation and inflammatory factors in your bloodstream. Now, there are a whole range of them, and I'm not going to discuss them here, but some of these may be helpful, and science is advancing to try and test out how much these might help. Finally, one of the other important aspects by which we can improve, if you like, or reduce or impair the aging process might be the use of exosomes or stem cells. This is currently in its infancy in terms of understanding and development, but we do know that these can help, as they've helped in a large number of disorders, to be able to reduce the aging process. In sum, aging is a very complex process. It is driven by hormones, it is driven by genetics, it is driven by metabolism, and is also driven by inflammatory factors and also inflammation related to either the oxidative stress that we take in by ingesting oxygen or by other parameters that cause us to have inflammation. So inflammation is very important, genetic control is very important, and the ability to modify these either by diet, by vitamin supplements, or hyperbaric oxygen may become very important in the future as we time travel forwards in medicine. I finish with an adage that I always tell my friends and my students as I walk along the corridor and they ask me, "What are you doing today, Professor?" And I say, well, make every day count, because it is always later than you think. Thank you for listening to this, and I hope at least some of this was entertaining and you got to know a little bit more about the aging process. If you like this program, please don't forget to subscribe by clicking on the button below. It really does help for us to be able to bring you this great content. See you soon. Bye-bye.